Marco Rubio thought mocking an aging actor on live TV would earn him applause. He smirked, dropped a line about Hollywood fantasies, and moved on. But what happened next made the entire hearing room freeze. Arnold didn't raise his voice. He didn't even flinch. He just opened a folder, and in less than 10 minutes, a 15-year Senate record collapsed without a single punch. This is the moment the room stopped breathing. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The chamber was already tense. The House-Senate joint hearing on economic reintegration policy was supposed to be routine, another afternoon of posturing, prepared statements, and benign nodding. The C-SPAN cameras rolled in slow, wide arcs. Microphones were hot but mostly ignored. At the center, Senator Marco Rubio, Florida Republican, 3-term incumbent, necktie immaculately tied, confidence in full bloom. Across the U-shaped panel, Arnold Schwarzenegger, seated as a special advisor invited to present findings from a multi-state workforce rehabilitation program he helped pilot. No nameplate. No staff behind him. Just a simple Navy folder and a glass of water. Rubio leaned forward into the microphone, clearing his throat. I think everyone in this room understands that economic policy has to be grounded in reality, not in movie scripts. There was no laughter yet. Just posture shifts. Then came the second strike, measured, slow, precise. We're dealing with real budgets, real consequences. Not some Hollywood fantasy where the hero saves the economy after one inspirational monologue. The delivery was practiced. Almost too smooth. And then, the look. Rubio's eyes flicked, just once, toward Arnold. The kind of glance that pretends to be incidental but lands like a dart. A calculated beat of silence followed. Not even the rustle of papers. Just that glance, held one fraction of a second too long. Arnold didn't move. But someone else did. A Republican congresswoman 2 seats to Rubio's left shifted in her chair. Not dramatically, but enough for the camera to catch it. Her jaw tightened slightly. She turned her head just enough to look at Rubio, not past him. That was the signal. Something had crossed a line. It wasn't the insult itself. Washington was built on insults. It was the precision of the delivery, the cheapness of the target, and the assumption of impunity. Rubio hadn't just dismissed a policy, he had dismissed a person. The C-SPAN camera, slow on its return pan, caught Arnold in profile. Still. Unmoving. His left hand rested lightly on the folder in front of him. His fingers did not twitch. Rubio pressed on, oblivious to the tension he'd detonated. I'm all for creative thinking, he added, lips curled upward, but we're not here to cast actors. We're here to rebuild the economy. That was it. The third strike. A few aides in the second row exchanged looks. One shook their head, barely perceptible. The chair of the committee cleared his throat, a little louder than necessary. Thank you, Senator Rubio. Let's move to our next witness, Mr. Schwarzenegger. Arnold looked up, but he didn't speak yet. He simply nodded, eyes calm, unreadable. He didn't glance at Rubio. Didn't adjust the microphone. Didn't react in any way that would give the moment oxygen. And yet, the room had already shifted. Rubio sat back, self-satisfied. His hands folded neatly over his printouts. But something about the energy in the chamber had changed. Not outwardly. Not in volume. Just perceptibly. Like the moment before a glass shatters. Arnold didn't touch his folder. He didn't lift his pen. He let the pause breathe. And C-SPAN, dutiful, deadpan, indiscriminate, caught all of it. 3 rows back, a Bloomberg reporter tapped a message into her phone. Just 6 words, Rubio just poked a sleeping bear. That message would be forwarded 42 times in the next 3 minutes. But inside the room, all was still. No drama. No escalation. Just a statement made, a glance delivered, and a silence left behind, pregnant with calculation. And in that silence, the audience watching from home, especially those above 40, who'd been lectured, overlooked, or condescended to, felt something shift. It wasn't just disrespect. It was dismissal. And something about that glance, That one sideways flick of the eye made them sit up straighter in their chairs. Because everyone knew what was coming next. And it wouldn't be a punch. It wouldn't be a slogan. It would be a folder. And the sound of a career slowly folding into itself. The committee recessed for a 5-minute break. Senators stretched. Aides swapped notes. The cameras, as always, kept rolling. Not the A-cam, the frontal wide shot reserved for official statements, but the B-roaming lens, the one that caught body language, side glances, whispered exchanges. Marco Rubio leaned back in his chair. His face relaxed, his posture looser. He motioned for his legislative assistant to come closer. She leaned in, holding a folder labeled Job Force Metrics. What he said wasn't intended for broadcast. That was the first mistake. Hollywood thinks putting unemployed folks on treadmills counts as economic recovery, Rubio muttered, smirking. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant to be heard. But it was. The lav mic clipped to his lapel, still live. The committee's audio board, still active. The whisper, just loud enough, bled through the overhead speakers, softly but unmistakably, like feedback that somehow carried insult instead of static. It echoed, once, in the high-ceilinged hearing room. And then came the shift. 3 rows behind Rubio, a Bloomberg reporter's head snapped up. She didn't look at him. She looked at the sound engineer on the sidewall, who was frozen, eyes wide, as if he too had just realized the feed hadn't been cut. To the right, a junior staffer assigned to Arnold looked up from her tablet, eyes narrowing as she processed the words. She didn't write anything. She didn't whisper. She simply looked at the back of Rubio's chair, then at the camera mounted just above the center wall. Rubio chuckled softly, unaware. His assistant didn't. She took a half-step back, lips slightly parted, but said nothing. Arnold still hadn't moved. He remained in his seat, hands steepled now, folder unopened. But the camera, the B-cam, had already closed in. His face in frame. His eyes steady. One blink. Nothing more. Behind him, a member of the gallery, likely an economic advisor from the Treasury Department, exchanged a sharp glance with the person beside him. No words. Just a faint purse of the lips. A mutual recognition. Did he just say that? Into a mic. The chair of the committee returned, tapping the gavel softly. Let's bring the hearing back into session. No one spoke of what they had just heard. But everyone heard it. That was enough. Within 60 seconds, the clip was already in circulation. The Bloomberg reporter had texted her editor, Rubio hot mic insulted program, mentioned Arnold. Might go viral. The editor's reply was immediate. Clip it. Timestamp it. Publish now. On X, formerly Twitter, a 12-second video segment began to spread with the caption, Senator Rubio's mic was still on. This is what he said about the recovery plan Schwarzenegger helped draft. #Rubio mic #economic snark #Arnold listens back inside the room. The hearing resumed. Rubio adjusted his blazer. Still unaware. Still confident. The soundboard engineer now had both hands folded tightly under his chair. He wasn't paid to feel regret, but the moment had weight. It pressed across the space like low barometric pressure before a summer storm. Arnold shifted slightly in his seat. Not to speak. Not yet. Just enough to let the overhead light catch the crease in his brow. He didn't need to acknowledge what had been said. The room was already doing that for him. One Democratic aide whispered to another, he just gave Arnold permission. Permission for what? To end him. A few seats down, a Republican committee member, no friend to Arnold, leaned toward his own counsel and muttered, "Tell me that wasn't on record." The counsel didn't answer. Because it was. By then, the clip had crossed into TikTok, overlaid with dramatic music, closed captions, and freeze frames of Rubio's smirk. Hollywood thinks putting unemployed folks on treadmills, pause, into a mic. On the record. On camera. But Arnold remained still. And that silence, measured, deliberate, became the most uncomfortable part of all. Because no one could tell whether he was preparing a response, or had already written it, years ago, and had simply been waiting for the exact moment to unfold the page. Rubio returned to his notes. Arnold reached, not for the microphone, not for the water glass, but for the folder. Still closed. But now, one hand rested on it, as if he were waiting not for permission, but for gravity to shift. And it just had. The microphones were live again. But this time, the noise had vanished. No murmurs. No paper shuffling. Just that strange kind of silence that arrives when a room collectively senses it's standing on the edge of something, without knowing quite what. Senator Rubio finished scribbling a final note on his legal pad and leaned back slightly, bracing for another round of softball affirmations or theoretical economic abstractions. He assumed the MIC would go back to the experts. But the chair cleared his throat. "Mr. Schwarzenegger, you have the floor." Arnold didn't speak immediately. He didn't even look up. He was holding a pen. Simple. Silver. Government issue. It turned slowly between his index and middle fingers, each rotation controlled and deliberate. Not a nervous tick, a measured metronome. Then his voice came, low, neutral, unhurried. "Professor Greenfield," he began, addressing the lead economist seated 3 chairs away, "can you remind this committee of the last instance a sitting senator promised that corporate tax cuts would, quote, pay for themselves, and whether that promise proved accurate?" No one flinched. Not even the economist. But the camera, the same B-cam from before, tilted. It didn't zoom on the professor. It held on Arnold. His body leaned a fraction toward the witness panel, just enough to show participation, but his eyes remained fixed on Marco Rubio. The economist stammered slightly, not out of confusion, but surprise. He hadn't expected the question to be framed like that. Yes. That claim was made by several lawmakers during the debate over the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The primary assertion was that the cuts would stimulate sufficient economic growth to offset revenue losses. Arnold nodded once, still watching Rubio. And did they? The economist adjusted his glasses. "No, sir. According to both the Congressional Budget Office and independent evaluations, the cuts contributed to an increase in the federal deficit, with no compensatory revenue rebound." The answer wasn't explosive. It wasn't even new. But the context was. Because this wasn't about the tax cut anymore. It was about the person who made the promise, and who was now refusing to meet the gaze of the man repeating it. Rubio looked down. Not dramatically. Just long enough to break eye contact. He scribbled something. The pen slipped once. The camera caught it. So did 2 staffers behind him, both of whom exchanged an expressionless glance. Arnold's pen, beneath the table, had stopped spinning. "Thank you," Arnold said, turning his head fractionally toward the economist, but not away from Rubio. "I appreciate clarity. We don't always get that in this building." His tone didn't change. His cadence didn't shift. But the subtext was thunder. The tension didn't come from accusation. It came from the lack of it. The kind of silence that only exists when a room full of people realizes a man is not angry because he doesn't need to be. Because he already knows what's about to happen. Arnold's left hand tapped once, softly, on the edge of his folder. Not to open it. Not yet. Just to remind the room that it was still there. Rubio cleared his throat, but didn't speak. Another senator glanced at the chair, as if to break the moment. But the chair didn't intervene. He was watching too. "One more question, Professor," Arnold said. "What do we call it when policy predictions fail repeatedly across multiple fiscal cycles, yet continue to be presented with the same tone of certainty?" It was rhetorical. But the economist hesitated, then answered anyway. I suppose some would call that political branding." Arnold didn't smile. He didn't respond. He simply uncapped his pen. And then, for the first time, looked down. Power, in that moment, moved without making a sound. There was no cue. No flare in the room's temperature. No shift in camera angle. No gasp. No sudden musical swell. Just emotion. Arnold reached out, not suddenly, not slowly, and with a single motion of his right hand, slid the microphone closer to himself. He did not look at it. He did not clear his throat. He didn't even blink. But the sound of the mic bass scraping lightly across the wooden desk cut through the room like chalked-down slate. A hairline vibration, sharp and unmistakable. A few heads in the gallery turned instinctively. Even Rubio raised his eyes, not fully, just enough to register movement. Arnold opened the black folder. Not abruptly. Not for effect. He opened it the way someone opens a ledger, factual, unsentimental, recorded. And then he began. In 2017, he said, his voice steady but not loud, Senator Rubio stated the following, quote, "Corporate tax cuts will lead to an average of $4,000 in wage increases for American families." There was no objection. No interruption. Because this wasn't debate. This was documentation. Arnold turned the page. The sound of it moving was audible, because no one else in the room was making any. According to post-legislation data from the U.S. Department of the Treasury, he continued, the actual median increase in household wages was $212. He didn't comment. He didn't editorialize. He read. And let the silence hang like fog. Rubio shifted in his seat. Just once. A glance downward. A foot repositioned. Arnold flipped again. In 2018, Senator Rubio said, and I quote, "Tariffs on China will bring manufacturing jobs back to the U.S. and protect consumers from unfair pricing." Between Q3 of 2018 and Q4 of 2019, Bureau of Labor Statistics data show a net loss of 35,000 U.S. manufacturing jobs, while consumer prices on affected goods rose by 9%. A quiet exhale could be heard from someone in the second row. Arnold kept reading. Still no emotion. No escalation. Just calibration. In 2020, during stimulus negotiations, Senator Rubio said, quote, "Extended unemployment benefits disincentivize work and will slow recovery." Data from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York shows that unemployment dropped faster in the quarters following the extended benefits than in comparable periods without them. He paused. Not to glance around. Not to ask a question. Just to let the room feel how each number stacked. And then, he closed the folder. Both hands. One on each side. The motion was precise, symmetrical, and unceremonious. But it landed like a sentence. A silent, heavy full stop. Rubio moved again. He looked like he might speak. But nothing came. Because it wasn't a debate anymore. It was a filing. A matter of public record. And the record had just been corrected. The chair of the committee didn't interrupt. Not because he agreed. But because there was nothing left to say. In the third row, a reporter for Reuters tapped a headline into her phone. Schwarzenegger closes folder, opens accountability. Rubio inhaled. Opened his mouth. Arnold didn't even look at him. He simply folded his hands over the closed folder, rested his elbows on the table, and looked forward, not at a person, not at the cameras, but into the center of the space itself. A long, calculated stillness. One senator checked his watch. Not for the time, but to have something to do with his hands. Rubio finally leaned toward his own microphone, hesitated, then sat back. The body motion of someone trying to climb back into a conversation that had already left without him. Arnold didn't smile. He didn't need to. The power had already changed chairs. And no one needed to be told. They felt it. The folder was closed. Arnold had not moved since. Neither had the air in the room. The rhythm of the hearing, once predictable, once dominated by policy cliches and ego postures, had stalled. Not because of volume. Not because of a shout. But because no one knew where to go next. The chair looked down at his notes, hesitating. Rubio shifted, then leaned toward his microphone. "I'd like to clarify, if I may," Arnold spoke. Quiet. Precise. Unhurried. "Senator." Rubio stopped. Arnold did not look at him. He didn't need to. His voice stayed calm. Almost indifferent. If experience is the most important qualification for shaping national policy, then what do we call it when someone accumulates 15 years of experience, being consistently wrong? There was no gasp. No audible response. Only stillness. Rubio froze, half turned toward his MIC, unsure whether to continue or retreat. A beat passed. Then another. And then movement, not from Rubio, but from the senator seated just beside him. A quiet shift in the chair. A repositioning. Not dramatic, just enough to signal discomfort. The kind of movement that says, I don't want to be mistaken for a participant in what's happening. He glanced at Rubio. Rubio looked back, perhaps hoping for support. The senator turned his eyes away, down, then to his notes. Not with shame, but with strategic disassociation. The camera caught it. Bcam 2, slow pan left, Rubio searching for eye contact, finding instead a row of shoulders turned slightly away. It wasn't hostility. It was evacuation. No one would stand next to a structure that was visibly collapsing. Arnold didn't press. He sat still, fingers laced over the now closed folder, gaze forward. Rubio inhaled. The MIC in front of him flickered its small red light, live, waiting. He didn't speak. Somewhere in the press section, a reporter for NPR scribbled a phrase in all caps, question as verdict. Because that's what it was. Not a trap. Not a trick. Just a single sentence, loaded with receipts, spoken without anger, and impossible to walk around. And everyone in the room, everyone watching the stream, understood its weight. Because what could Rubio say? I was wrong repeatedly, but consistently. 15 years of bad forecasts make me seasoned. Any answer would only confirm the premise. That was the genius. There was no safe reply. To answer was to lose. To stay silent was to surrender. And to deflect, well, there were no defenders left. Rubio scanned his notepad. Aides behind him avoided his line of sight. The chair finally broke the pause. Do you wish to respond, Senator Rubio? Rubio blinked. Fingers tightened on the edge of his table. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The microphone's red light blinked twice, a technical flicker, like even the hardware had given up waiting. Arnold never looked in his direction. He simply reached for the water glass beside him, lifted it, drank once, and set it back down. A motion so mundane it became defiant. Control had shifted. Permanently. No volume. No declaration. Just a question. And no one willing to help him answer it. The question still hung in the air. 15 years of failure. And no answer. Marco Rubio hadn't responded. He couldn't. Not without confirming what the room had already absorbed. Now, the silence was no longer expectant. It was final. And then, it happened. Rubio shifted. Slowly. Stiffly. He reached for the stack of papers in front of him. His fingers trembled, not dramatically, not visibly to most, but just enough for the corner sheet to slip from the stack and flutter to the floor. A single white page. It landed face down. Unread. Like a metaphor that didn't need explaining. He didn't pick it up. Instead, Rubio stood, and the chair he vacated scraped backward across the wooden floor with a long, grating screech that cut through the tension like a misplayed violin note. Not a slam. Not a dramatic exit. But loud enough that no one could pretend they didn't hear it. It was the only sound in the room. No one called his name. No one asked him to stay. No one offered cover. He gathered the rest of his materials, uneven, clumsy, tucking them into a leather folio that no longer seemed organized. A pen dropped. He didn't notice. He took a breath. It caught. And then he turned from the table, not toward the door, not yet, but toward the aisle. As he stepped away, Arnold moved. Not much. Just enough to shift the black folder half an inch to his left, away from center stage. The gesture was quiet. Dismissive. I have 9 pages left, he said, voice low, almost conversational. But I think the room understands. He didn't look at Rubio. The comment wasn't addressed to anyone. But the entire chamber received it. A murmur started, not in words, but in posture. A young aide near the side wall shook his head once, barely perceptible, and took a small step back.
No whisper.
No expression. Just the quiet, instinctive recoil from proximity to a man now untethered from authority. The camera followed Rubio from behind. No zoom. No tracking shot. Just a wide, lingering frame that showed him walking, hands tight on his folder, jaw locked, down the side aisle of the committee room. He didn't turn back. But at the very last second, as he reached the double doors, he paused. Just briefly. As if weighing whether to pivot. Whether to salvage. Whether to speak. But the pause cost him more than it gave. Because that hesitation, that half-second of frozen indecision, was long enough for the room to watch him flinch. And it was recorded. Every frame. He pushed the door. It didn't open smoothly. A slight resistance. Then gone. And so was he. Behind him, the air remained still. Arnold didn't speak again. The chair didn't rush to resume. Because there was nothing to resume. The moment had concluded itself. The next morning, the clip hit 12 million views before breakfast. Not from an official source. Not from C-SPAN. But from a 23-second screen recording posted by a congressional intern. No watermark. Just the sound of a chair scraping wood, and a voice that never raised. I have 9 pages left. But I think the room understands. That was the quote. That was the dagger. And it didn't need Arnold's name to go viral. In a newsroom in Manhattan, a segment producer whispered, "Do we blur Rubio's face?" The senior editor didn't answer. He just stared at the freeze frame on his screen. Rubio bent slightly, reaching for a loose page on the floor, eyes down, mouth open but with no sound. The chyron below read, 15 years. One sentence. Game over. A new hashtag trended by noon. The folder did it, then came another. Rubio math fail by mid-afternoon. Someone cut a remix, slow motion, color graded, with the sound of the chair screech layered over the beat. The audio engineer added a bass drop on the line, $212. Followed by a dead silence. Then Arnold closing the folder with both hands, softly, precisely, like a judge tapping once with a gavel, then never again. But what shook the Senate wasn't the memes. Or the remix. It was the email thread leaked from Rubio's comms director. It read, "Do we issue a statement clarifying that the $4,000 quote was metaphorical?" And under that, "What if someone asks about the treadmill comment?" Another staffer replied, "That my C was supposed to be off." Inside Capitol Hill, the silence continued, not out of respect, but calculation. In a hallway near the press stairs, a group of junior aides looked up as Arnold passed. None spoke. But one of them tilted their phone just enough for him to see the paused video. He didn't look twice. Just walked. That night, a columnist in The Atlantic wrote, "He didn't win by shouting. He didn't destroy his opponent. He didn't argue. He just documented. And then let the receipts speak louder than the reputation." The only public comment Arnold made was on a podcast, not even about the hearing. The host asked if politics felt like Hollywood. Arnold smiled, a calm, closed-mouth smile, and said, "In Hollywood, they give you a script. In Washington, they hand you a folder. The real difference is who opens it first." That quote made it to a t-shirt in 24 hours. But the image that stuck, the one that became a meme, a sticker, even a Discord emoji, wasn't a face. Wasn't Arnold at all. It was the folder. Matte black. One crease along the left side. 2 hands closing it. No logo. No name. Just a single caption underneath. Page 3 was enough. And Rubio? He didn't lose his seat. Not yet. But he cancelled his next press appearance. And his staff stopped scheduling televised committees. For weeks, whenever he stepped into a room, someone would cough, just once, after he sat down. And more than once, someone, a janitor, a tech, a page, would adjust a nearby microphone and quietly say, "Still on." Back in the chamber, the folder still sat on the desk. Closed. Never collected. Arnold never came back for it. He didn't need to. The room had already closed.